America often prides itself on ideals of freedom and equality. However, the nation's history tells a different story. From the very beginning, America was built on the displacement and genocide of indigenous peoples. European colonists, driven by greed and a sense of superiority, seized native lands and brutally subjugated their populations. Millions of Native Americans were killed through violence, disease, and forced removal. The horrors inflicted upon indigenous communities cannot be overstated. Their cultures were decimated, their languages suppressed, and their very existence threatened. This tragic history continues to cast a long shadow over America, a stark reminder of the nation's violent origins. Adding to this shameful legacy is the institution of slavery. For centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly brought to America, stripped of their humanity and subjected to unimaginable cruelty. They were treated as property, denied basic rights, and subjected to brutal forms of punishment. The legacy of slavery continues to haunt America, manifesting in systemic racism and deep-seated inequalities. The founding of America is a story of both triumph and tragedy. While celebrating the ideals of democracy, it's crucial to acknowledge and confront the dark reality of genocide and slavery that stains the nation's past. Only by understanding the depths of this history can we truly move towards a more just and equitable future. Individual racism refers to the prejudiced beliefs and discriminatory actions of individuals towards others based solely on their race. It can manifest in various forms, from overt acts of aggression to subtle microaggressions. Examples include using racial slurs, making assumptions about someone's intelligence or character based on their race, or treating individuals differently based on their skin color. These actions, whether intentional or unintentional, stem from ingrained prejudices and stereotypes. They contribute to a hostile environment for marginalized groups and perpetuate racial inequalities. Addressing individual racism requires self-reflection and a willingness to unlearn harmful biases. It is crucial to recognize that racism is not just about overt acts of hatred, but also about the subtle ways in which we may perpetuate prejudice through our words and actions. By challenging our own biases, educating ourselves about different cultures, and actively promoting equality in our daily lives, we can contribute to dismantling individual racism and creating a more inclusive society. Institutional racism, also known as systemic racism, refers to the ways in which racist beliefs and practices are embedded within institutions and systems. This form of racism is often less visible than individual acts of prejudice, but can be far more pervasive and damaging. It operates through policies, practices, and procedures that disadvantage certain racial groups while benefiting others. Examples of institutional racism are widespread and can be found in various sectors. In education, schools with predominantly minority students often receive less funding and resources, leading to disparities in educational outcomes. In the criminal justice system, racial profiling and sentencing disparities disproportionately target and punish people of color. Housing discrimination is another stark example, where people of color often face barriers in accessing safe and affordable housing. These systemic inequalities result from historical and ongoing practices that perpetuate racial disparities, making it crucial to dismantle these systems of oppression. Addressing institutional racism requires a comprehensive approach that involves dismantling discriminatory policies, promoting diversity and inclusion within institutions, and ensuring equal access to opportunities and resources for all racial groups. Section 4. Cultural racism. The perpetuation of stereotypes and inequality. Cultural racism refers to the societal beliefs, customs, and practices that perpetuate racial stereotypes and inequalities. It manifests in the ways different cultures are valued, represented, and treated within a society. This form of racism often operates subtly, influencing our perceptions of different racial groups and shaping our understanding of the world. One prominent example of cultural racism is the underrepresentation and misrepresentation of people of color in media. From news coverage to television shows and movies, racial minorities are often relegated to stereotypical roles or excluded altogether. This lack of representation perpetuates harmful stereotypes and limits opportunities for people of color in the entertainment industry. Another example is the appropriation and commodification of elements from marginalized cultures. This can range from fashion to music, where aspects of minority cultures are often adopted without proper acknowledgement or respect for their origins. This appropriation reinforces power imbalances and perpetuates the devaluation of marginalized cultures. Addressing cultural racism requires a critical examination of societal norms and values. It involves challenging stereotypes, promoting diversity in all aspects of society, and valuing and respecting the contributions of all cultures. Section 5. Structural racism, the intertwined web of disadvantage. Structural racism refers to the interconnected systems and institutions that work together to create and perpetuate racial inequality. It is the most insidious and pervasive form of racism, as it operates across multiple domains, including housing, education, healthcare, employment, and the criminal justice system, to disadvantage certain racial groups and advantage others. This interconnected web of disadvantage is rooted in historical injustices such as slavery and segregation, and continues to manifest in contemporary policies and practices. For example, residential segregation, a legacy of discriminatory housing policies, concentrates poverty and limits access to quality education and employment opportunities for communities of color. Similarly, disparities in healthcare access and quality contribute to significant health inequities, with people of color experiencing higher rates of chronic illnesses and lower life expectancies. These interconnected systems create cycles of disadvantage that are difficult to break, perpetuating racial inequality across generations. Addressing structural racism requires a comprehensive and transformative approach that addresses the root causes of inequality. This includes dismantling discriminatory policies, investing in marginalized communities, and promoting equitable access to opportunities and resources for all. Section 6. The unfinished fight confronting racism's enduring legacy. Racism, in its various forms, continues to permeate American society, casting a long shadow over the nation's past and present. From the genocide of indigenous peoples and the horrors of slavery to the persistence of individual prejudices, institutional biases, cultural stereotypes, and structural inequalities, racism remains an enduring stain on the fabric of America. Understanding the interconnectedness of these various forms of racism is crucial to effectively combating it. Individual acts of prejudice contribute to the normalization of racist attitudes, which in turn shape institutional policies and practices. These institutions then reinforce cultural stereotypes and contribute to the structural disadvantages faced by marginalized groups. Confronting racism requires a multi-pronged approach that addresses all levels of this complex issue. This includes promoting individual accountability, dismantling institutional racism, challenging cultural stereotypes, and dismantling the structures that perpetuate racial inequality. The fight against racism is an ongoing struggle that demands sustained effort, unwavering commitment, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. By acknowledging the historical roots of racism, understanding its various manifestations, and working collaboratively to dismantle systems of oppression, we can strive to create a more just and equitable society for all.